So this is part of an image that I wanted to print large, and I wanted to soften the skin, some of these imperfections, or what you want to call them, without losing the texture, because I still want her skin to look natural, and we naturally have texture on our skin. So we're going to start by duplicating the background. So I'm going to click Command J, and we're going to duplicate it twice. And then click on this first copy, and we're going to add a Gaussian blur to that layer. And if you back off the blur, you can see her pores. And we want to put the blur up until we can't see her pores. So for this image, it's about 2.5 pixels. So that looks pretty good. We can't really see her pores. And then we're going to click on the other layer that we copied and go to the image menu and go to apply image. Okay, we're going to change this layer to background copy. And this process seems maybe a little bit complicated just because of this dialog box. It's really simple, but if you don't have something that you're referencing, it's a little hard to remember this part. But once you do it a couple times, you start to remember. And we're gonna change blending to add, and then scale is gonna be at 2, and offset should be at 0. You want to make sure the invert box is checked, and then you should be able to close the dialog box. And this layer is going to be your texture, so I like to name them so that I don't get confused. And this is color. So what we did is we just took the texture and put it on its own layer, so we can fix some of the color differences without changing the texture. And we're going to change the blending mode on the texture layer to linear light. And you can mess with the different options for blending modes, but linear light usually does the job. So now we have the texture separate from the color, and we can go in and change some of the color. And I like to use the brush tool for this. So I have the opacity at 20%. You want to keep it pretty low so that you can really blend the colors together. So we're going to use the Option or Alt key to sample a color, and then just kind of airbrush over. And this is the part that takes the most time. You want to just find a color that you like. So the coloring here is kind of a little off, so I'm going to grab some color from over here, and I'm just going to paint it over here. And you want to keep sampling the colors so that you don't get any weird textures with the color. So like I said, this part takes a long time. You can, depending on how long or how perfect you want your image to be, you can spend hours on this part. So I'll just do a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. And sometimes, see how I kind of got a line there? Sometimes it helps to change the opacity down to 10. So you can just click 1 to change it to 10. And I'm going to sample from over here so I get a good color here. So you can also use the spot healing brush on the texture layer. And for these little spots, you want to zoom in really close. So see how there's all these little white spots? We don't really need those for part of our texture. So I'm going to make this really small, just a little bit bigger than the size of these dots. Oops, I'm still on my brush tool. Let's go to the spot healing brush. And I'll just start clicking, and this is kind of tedious because there's a bunch of them, but it really is worth it when you're printing a large image and you want it to look really nice. Oops. So I'm kind of going quick right now and not doing the greatest job, but you kind of get the idea of what you can do. So right now I'm just working on the texture layer, and when you start to play around with this, you kind of can see which blemishes are texture problems and which ones are color problems. It kind of takes a little bit to get used to it, but once you do it for a little bit, you kind of figure it out. So I'm going to switch back to the color layer and see how there's some discoloring right here. I'm going to work on that. Zoom out just a little bit. See how that's just lightening up a little bit? So we'll probably want to go through, you see all these little white spots, go through with the healing brush and fix those on the texture. So when I printed this image large, I spent at least an hour fixing the skin. So you can really spend a lot of time on this, just depending on what you want. And you can also use the brush tool to kind of lighten these veins a little bit. We can take some of this color here and just draw it over here. Might need a little bit more opacity. See if you can see a difference there. So you can do as much or as little as you want there. Just take a color from here. It's maybe a little bit too much. But you get the idea, and we didn't do a ton to this image, but you can still see a difference, especially if we zoom up really close on these parts that we wanted to change. We can see that's a little bit smoother there in that area. You don't have all the differences in color. So it still needs a lot of work, but it definitely looks like we made some improvement in some of these areas. You can see some of that there too.